a really horrifying, disturbing trend we're seeing in general right now, given how fractured our information environment is and how engagement sells, intrigue sells. Facts, take them or leave them is kind of how a lot of people feel right now about facts. And this segment's a little bit more than the substance of it, is more of a PSA to all of you that please try, because it's only the audiences who are going to be able to control this. Some people, like me, will try to stand by principles, but it's going to be y'all who, with your dollar, with your clicks, etc., really direct the future of political reporting and political commentary. And right now people are being rewarded for all of the wrong things. And so we will talk about just the latest example I've seen of a conspiracy theory running wild about Kirk's assassination. And this one's strange. It's like something about Ukraine is involved. This is a part of a Ukrainian operation. And it's sad because you have such a horrific event. You'd imagine people would feel some heightened obligation to being honest, but it's the opposite. They see it as the emotion attached with such an event will serve as the best stimulator for intrigue, and conspiracy theories feed that more than anything else. And then we'll talk about the violence that we've seen over the weekend and more examples of people lying about that. So let's listen. This is a guy, George Webb. I think because, obviously a huge passion of mine is Ukraine, and recently was there, and so I'm connected with a lot of Ukrainian topic accounts, but then also as I see what the pro-Russian accounts are saying, and we've prepped segments to debunk those, I think more of this type of stuff has started popping up in my feed that come from Kremlin-associated, pro-Kremlin accounts, and then make their way to George Webb, who describes himself as an investigative journalist. Let's see what George Webb is investigating.
Okay, hello everyone, George Webb here in Utah. I decided to re-record about Tyler Robinson, and more information we're finding out about Tyler Robinson when he left Utah State in 2021. Early in 2022, goes into an electrical training program at Dixie Tech in St. George for only 10 months. Barely into 2023, that leaves a 2.5-year role here on the resume. I'm going to get away from the ticking time bomb, the ticking demolitions time bomb. I'm going to get away from the ticking demolitions time bomb of Tyler Robinson, but we do think he went into.
I was kind of strange. Kind of a strange little aside. Okay, sorry.
Demolition. We do think he was going to school at night. He had some type of day job where he wasn't going to the school. He was going to school at night. He was only there 10 months. He had to leave. They're not saying why he left. I believe he left to go to the Ukraine war. Okay,
so that's the first mention to it. And this is what I'm trying to demonstrate for you, how these things come about. And he's going to make all sorts of inaccurate claims. It's going to be possible to touch every single one, but we'll focus on the crux of it, which is Tyler Robinson went to Ukraine to fight in the war, or to be trained to then come back and do this. And what happens is you get the official story, and especially with such a dishonest administration, I get why then the chaos that we've seen from them and the investigatory process and all that can fuel people wanting different answers or to fill in some of the gaps. But it's kind of like you ask a lot of questions, and any subject, especially one that's so beyond our comprehension that someone shoots another person in front of the world, right, in that manner. Then we want answers, but you don't always get them really quickly. And so then you start trying to fill it in. But the dangerous part is it's fine to go, I wonder about this or I wonder about, but you just start based on whatever you want to believe. Like, this guy clearly doesn't like Ukraine and wants to believe that this is a part of a scheme to get us into a war with Ukraine, or not with Ukraine, for Ukraine, with Russia. But then you just kind of invent things like, oh, maybe he was in Ukraine during the years that I don't know exactly every minute of what he was doing. And we'll keep listening.
A day job where he wasn't going to the school. He was going to school at night. He was only there 10 months. He had to leave. They're not saying why he left. I believe he left to go to the Ukraine war. We had Uncle Mikey, right? We don't know if it's his real uncle or if the uncle of his mother or the uncle of his father. We don't know who Uncle Mikey, what role he plays, but he's the one who got him involved in this 8-year ROTC program. Remember, he is probably the top math student, 99% percentile in calculus, AP calculus. That's for bridges and for dropping bridges, understanding those kind of things. He's not going and becoming an electrician to learn how to wire streetlights or wire doorbells, right? That's not what he's doing with Uncle Mikey. The war is...
I'm going to address this just in case you're curious. This is scary. How people, without evidence, run themselves into a whole storyline. I'll tell you who Uncle Mikey is. You're going to be shocked to find out that it's not what... I already forgot. Can you take it down? What George Webb is saying. While we continue to do this, if you do appreciate the show, please do click the subscribe button if you want to support us algorithmically.
What's going on? You do need for whom the bell tolls type demolitions experts. And as you can see, there's a lot of mountains here. There's a lot of gold near St. George. There's a lot of silver near St. George. Antimony is here for the space industry, night vision goggles. A lot of the trace elements that are here, besides gold, silver, also copper, also lead. So he probably has got a job in those mountains, in them thar mountains. There's gold there, there's lead, there's silver in the St. George area. We did a lot of work in the St. George area over the last 3 years, looking at this ATF team, this rogue ATF team, all the way back. They go all the way back to kind of having their ox gored at Fast and Furious that his father is potentially involved in. We talked earlier about...
So you can already hear that probably a lot of this is just wild extrapolations or assumptions or speculations that he's connecting all these random dots that either are there but aren't connected or don't exist at all, which is a bunch of what he's saying. And you can see it by the... Probably he was doing work over there. Probably Mikey was his uncle. Probably he was in Ukraine fighting for Zelensky. But maybe not.
How his father had to be in law enforcement for his kid not to be handcuffed, right? To have 2.5 hours to construct an alternative narrative with twigs rather than connecting him to armed queers with Maya. So all of these things lead you to believe to the things that we've reported. Early in 2023, he leaves. They can't say why they left the apprenticeship, but he's coming. Maybe the mining dust from Tyler's explosions in the hills are getting to my Legionnaire's disease, my half a lung. So
what is happening? Not laughing at the half a lung, but just like the disjointedness of this video. That's the other part is, I guess he's saying he doesn't know, because you have like he did the 1 semester at the university and then started this apprenticeship program, electrical related and like technical training. And so then what is the other part of this is, as an investigation goes on, some of it gets released to the public, some of it doesn't. And there are going to be parts that you would go, oh, I'm curious about this timeline, part of the timeline, or what was going on here. And then if you instead word it, instead of the way I just did, if you go, they won't tell us why or what he was doing here or there, then you have this huge spectrum of answers you can throw at your audience that sound really titillating, that are really fascinating, that aren't backed by any evidence, but they kind of play on the holes of information. There's always going to be holes of what we know and don't know at any given point in investigation. And then you just kind of start answering them with your own fun theories. And I find it really sickening whenever we're talking about something of this gravity. It's not just, oh, the moon landing. What? Oh, why was the flag stiff? Oh, don't tell me it's because they put the wires in there to hold it that way. It's more interesting to think, what if it was fake, right? It's sort of like, okay, that doesn't really hurt anyone. Strange, but go, have fun. This is not that. And for him, he's trying to connect it to a conspiracy to silence anti-Ukrainian voices that is connected to prominent Ukrainian figures, as I'm trying to follow what has been very incoherent telling so far, and that we're going to put boots on the ground to fight Russia. That's where he's going.
But my point here is what we said about the working theory and what we said before even we even knew who the killer was, is leading us into the direction that we were quite correct, that it is this Ukraine group, and it is the motivating factor for killing Charlie Kirk. He was talking against the Ukraine war. You want to take out people who are going to college campuses where you need to get your recruits. You don't want him poisoning the well. You don't want Charlie Kirk poisoning the well on your recruits. What you want is an active force that's willing to go fight, if not through a draft by Donald Trump, which he's done a 180 on the Ukraine war, then by a mercenary, sort of the General Dynamics mercenaries that we did in Vietnam. Get your foot in the door, get your toe in the water in Ukraine with American mercenaries. The next thing is we've got boots on the ground. The next thing is we have boots on the ground.
So, I don't know if you can tell just from the way he explained that, but you might notice big, massive flaws, like evidence. But what's really annoying is if I show you, because I saw this and I wanted to just find some example of one of the latest examples, but there have been hundreds, and it's not just coming from this guy, clearly, I am assuming is on the right, based on how he's talking about these things. But it's not just on the right. You definitely have a whole conspiracy going on over there for different reasons, trying to answer different questions. But we just recently did a video talking about how some people that I usually respect have gone off the deep end in some directions as well. And that is more fueled by what is a perfectly understandable distrust of the Trump administration, Kash Patel, etc. But making up your own theories is not appropriate. You can be skeptical and critical without just inventing stuff. But when I see something like this, I want to show you an example. So I found one. There we go. So that we can have this discussion more broadly. But then what all of you will want in the audience is like, well, explain where he's getting this all from. And that's the hardest part of fact-checking conspiracy theorists, because you don't have a tool that they have a whole bag of. They have this whole bag of tools called inventing stuff. And so if I have to bring to you, what would be satisfying, and I will get to an example of this, but would be, here's exactly where he got this from, and here's why it's wrong. That means, first of all, understanding the stuff that's spilling out of his mouth that was kind of hard to even follow there, if I'm going to be honest. But then going out and finding in this big abyss of the World Wide Web where it came from, how it's incorrect, and then presenting that in a coherent way myself. Whereas if you're willing to just kind of do what is more interesting to listen to, then you have this unique, dangerous, but superpower where you just make up stuff. So a lot of things I couldn't even find what he's referencing. It was just kind of, he just threw it out there. I couldn't find it. Well, what is he even referencing there? But what seems central to this claim is the Uncle Mikey part. This is how I saw some pro-Russian accounts, as I tried to, without spending my whole day on this, connect some of the dots of what he's trying to say. Is you have pro-Russian accounts associated with those types of parts of the internet trying to blame this on Ukrainian advocacy, even though from what we know thus far in the investigation, it seems pretty clear that Robinson, he had the specific wording in those texts. I know people go, oh, blah, blah, but about seeing Kirk opposing his political views. I don't have to get into it again. Opposing his political views, being not on the same side as him politically, and then was radicalized enough, a lunatic enough to take that to the point of violence. But instead, you're kind of seeing this connection of a guy named Mike Robinson, because it's the same last name, which, hey, Robinson's a pretty common one. And these accounts, which I guess is where this guy got it from, saying, oh, that must be his uncle, and Mike Robinson went to Ukraine one time. But Mike Robinson is just a guy, and he's not Tyler Robinson's uncle. That's the part that I was able to specifically debunk with. Then Mike Robinson had to address this. I guess he's getting so many people on his LinkedIn and said, I'm looking for a lawyer to bring legal action against the social media entities that are falsely accusing me as being the Mormon MAGA moron psycho killer's dear uncle, Mikey Robinson. They accused me of training snipers in Ukraine. That is not only an intentional lie to hurt my reputation and to also intentionally put my life and family in fear for our safety and lives. Several journalists have already contacted me. Time for Trump tactics. See them in court. And there were all sorts of, so from what I can tell, to answer what your question probably was, which is where he gets from, he saw some account that these types of accounts are trying to connect everything to Ukraine because they're pro-Russian. And they found a guy who once went for humanitarian purposes to Ukraine. I think previously worked for Radio Free, retired director, Radio Free Ukraine. So probably the Radio Free Europe umbrella and Ukraine specifically, if I'm just quickly assuming. And then his last name's Robinson. So they go, oh, this must be Tyler Robinson's uncle. And he's not. And then they bring that all the way to, and Mike Robinson had all of these roles in Ukraine that he didn't. And then it becomes this whole theory. And then there was a cell that Tyler was training in so that he could stop Kirk, so that they could recruit college students to fight in Ukraine. And that's how we get there. With all of but what's confusing to me is I really don't like saying things if I'm like even 10% nervous that maybe it could be wrong. Like I want to feel 100% certain that what I'm saying is correct. I don't get how these people, I know it works on social media, but speak so confidently when they must know in their own head they're making all sorts of wild logic jumps, but they just run with it. And I think it's that the dopamine they get from it performing well is more important to them than being accurate. Now, we are in a moment where just one act of public, viral violence is happening after another. And let's talk about this example. The man who officials said opened fire on a church in suburban Michigan during worship service on Sunday has been identified by the police as a 40-year-old from Burton, Michigan, who went to high school nearby and served in the Marines. The authorities said they believe the man, identified as Thomas Jacob Sanford, also intentionally set fire to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints meeting house in Grand Blanc Township. Congregants were inside attending services, they said, when the building was engulfed in flames. 4 people inside the church died, 2 of gunshot wounds, the police said. 2 more bodies were found later in the church. So someone horrifically goes to this church, shoots people, sets the church on fire. And this is the part about the America we live in right now that really disturbs you, or it should, and the fact that our politicians really can't seem to implement the correct solutions on this. That wasn't the only mass shooting either throughout the weekend. Sunday's mass murder at a Mormon church in Grand Blanc Township, Michigan, who left at least 4 worshipers dead and 8 wounded, was just one of 6 mass shootings that erupted across the U.S. over a weekend of gun horror. And what I'm really, so first of all, just, of course, as always, our pain and our hearts are aching with all of the people impacted and just beautiful lives, innocent people being taken off of the earth. And then what is so scary is, especially in this moment where people are prioritizing political jabs and conspiracy theories and virality over being a normal, decent human being, we're further, I think that we've been a long time to having a unified discussion about how we address this problem. Because there are different folds to it, right? In the Kirk topic, we're discussing, there isn't a gun angle, but we're really discussing a political, someone using violence relating to a political figure, right? There's this political part of it. And then I think as we're having that screaming match at each other, as we've been covering over the politics of it all, and this is because you said fascist, like, well, you said fascist, and fascist, but, Stephen Miller got called a fascist, and then he said, oh, that's terrible, it's a death threat, but then you have all these examples, Stephen Miller calling Democrats fascist all the time, and so we're having that screaming match, right? And what we're losing sight of a little bit is then the broader mass suffering that's not being solved, and the gun violence that is constant to the point where 6 mass shootings happen in one weekend. And I think that the finger pointing that Kimmel called out, the blame game, is just pushing us further away from real solutions. And with a lot of these mass shootings, yes, gun regulations are part of that conversation. As well, we need to talk about mental health related things too. I know Republicans bring that part up. There's multiple prongs here. The guns are a huge part of it. The mental health and violence reduction programs, investing in communities in that way, addressing some of the more systemic factors. And that being a part of this at all is not happening right now. And instead, right when the Michigan church shooting happened, you had a lot of prominent figures on the right saying this is an example of sort of democratically inspired killing of Christians.
Goodness gracious. Kamala Harris last night, we must light the fire. Goodness. Just perfect timing there.
So connected to Kamala Harris saying fight fire with fire, which everyone says that all the time, and the shooter was a big Trump supporter. So it doesn't really, I don't know why you're doing that here. From what I can tell now, just quickly looking at what we know at this time, if anyone had sense, we would wait a moment, as I've been begging people to just let investigations happen without immediately jumping to finger pointing and assumptions. But from what I could tell, this guy, he definitely was MAGA. And I don't think that necessarily had anything to do with this shooting, but it was more like a religious-based hatred or opposition to Mormonism specifically. So he very well could have been a Christian of a different sect, Christian who hated Mormonism, and he had ranted about it being like the Antichrist, and then massacres people because of it. Horrible. And we could, Benny and I could unite in opposition to that. But no, it's always, how quickly can I make this a political attack? It's Kamala Harris's fault because she said something about a fire and a fire happened. When, since it was brought up all over right-wing Twitter, just to correct the record here, and that this doesn't mean there aren't, as we've talked about, left-wing attacks that have happened, but Mormon church shooter had a Trump sign outside his house. You have whole threads of reposting right-wing accounts that you can see here and pro-Trump stuff. USA Today, although Sanford's political views are unclear, Sanford is seen wearing a camouflage Trump 2020 campaign shirt and a 2019 photo. Google Street View of a home that public records identify as Sanford's primary address shows a blue Trump Pence yard sign attached to a backyard fence. So maybe the clarity there that this is not someone who was on the left and hated Christians because they were a left-wing radical doesn't mean there aren't examples of those people, but this wasn't one of them. Should be a wake-up call to all the people who, within 3 seconds of people being murdered, wanted to make it a political point and clearly were very wrong in this instance. So maybe that shouldn't be our first recourse every time. Maybe we should understand that of all sorts of different ideologies, it could be a religious fanaticism or a hatred of a religion or a hatred of LGBTQ folks. We've seen a recent example of that. Violence targeted against LGBTQ folks just for being that. And it could be a political ideology that people with unstable minds then act on behalf of. But it's way more about their mind than a blame game, is kind of my call to action here, I think. Because it was pretty gross. And you saw a Republican congressman saying this.
Obviously, the tragedy in Michigan yesterday at the Mormon church. This is not the first. We've seen a lot of churches attacked here recently. I know Democrats will go for guns, but is this time we got to talk about mental health?
Without a doubt, without a doubt. But as we were just talking about, if people are comparing Republicans and the president to Hitler, to fascists, okay, there are those that are mentally unstable out there that believe some of them. 2 days ago, Kamala Harris said, we got to fight fire with fire. We have a district attorney in Philadelphia who calls all Republicans, anyone who doesn't agree with him, fascist. The guy's nuts. He was paid for by Soros.
So you see, he was asked about the Michigan shooting, and he's talking, sort of recycling the same talking points. And I'm fine if we want to talk about de-escalating rhetoric, but a lot of the folks on the right were upset that Stephen Miller was called by Newsom a fascist, and then you have this collage of him calling Democrats fascists. So we gotta engage. I keep saying it. It has to be a two-sided solution approach. And in this case, it's weird to connect it to Kamala Harris when we have absolutely zero evidence that this guy was at all inspired by Kamala Harris. And his actual political views, from what we can tell as of now, we don't know for sure, but from the signs and the shirts and the reposts on Facebook it's pretty clear. He was a Trump fan, and I don't have any evidence that motivated the shooting. Probably was more his rantings about Mormonism. But it gets real dangerous, real dangerous, when you use every act of mass violence as fuel for your characterization of your opponent. Because then you get stuff like this, a Daily Caller op-ed. Published op-ed Friday, written by Jeffrey Ingersoll, that literally called for conservatives to choose violence against liberals. Today I choose violence, literally. I know calls for violence are generally frowned upon. The issue is I simply don't care. The law is not enough. Is this a call for violence? Yes, it explicitly is. Some of this cost needs to be summary and ultra-violent, and called for blood in the streets. And so whether it's a left-wing ideologue, the right-wing ideologue, a non-political loner detached from a society person just trying to get some sick notoriety, whether it's motivated against gay folks, motivated against conservatives, motivated against Christians, motivated against Muslims, etc., motivated against, now I'm going to get, people are going to say if I leave anyone out, Jewish folks, motivated against, all of them. Whoever it's motivated against and whoever's ideology is represented, we don't have to do the team sports thing in responding to it. I really don't think we have to do that. I think we can be much more level-headed and just human in our reaction. And I hope some of you agree.